Welcome to the Funeral Channel Network podcast. You know, I was actually sitting in my living room this morning, just kind of doom scrolling, and I decided to check my camera roll.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. Do you know how many photos I have on my phone right now?
I am honestly a little afraid to ask, but
Right.
knowing you, it is probably a five-figure number easily.
It was over 14,000.
Wow.
Yeah, 14,000 moments just captured, frozen, and stored in a cloud server somewhere in a desert out west.
Right.
And it hit me. I got this wave of anxiety, like if I lost this phone or if my cloud account got hacked or
Just blinked out of existence.
exactly, just vanished. How much of that memory is actually real, like physically, tangibly real?
Well, that is really the defining anxiety of digital age, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, we have infinite documentation. We are by far the most recorded generation in human history.
Right.
But we have almost zero physical evidence of it. We don't have those big trunks full of letters in the attic anymore. We don't have shoeboxes full of Polaroids under the bed. We just have JPEGs.
Exactly. We have JPEGs. And that is why today's deep dive feels so different from what we usually do.
Yeah, we're shifting gears a bit.
We really are.
Mm-hmm.
Usually we are looking forward, right? We look at tech trends, the future of the industry, digital memorials.
Mm-hmm.
But today we are pulling the emergency brake. We are looking at something intensely physical,
Very physical.
something totally tactile. We are talking about tangible memory. And specifically, we are unpacking the world of memorial cards.
It's a really fascinating pivot for us because when you lose someone, your first instinct is not usually to scroll through a digital album.
No, it's not.
The instinct is primal.
Yeah.
You want to hold on to something. You want to feel actual weight in your hand.
Yes.
You want an object that occupies physical space in the room with you.
And the object we are focusing on today is tiny. I mean, it literally fits in the palm of your hand.
Bailey.
Right. But as we are going to find out in this deep dive, the design decisions, the psychology, and the raw emotional weight packed into that little rectangle are massive.
Huge.
We are drawing heavily today from a comprehensive guide provided by the funeral program site.
They do great work.
They really do. And their guide breaks down the nuance of these cards, exploring what they actually call the art of remembrance.
And I think for a lot of you listening, this might seem like kind of a small topic at first glance.
A niche thing.
Right. You might think, oh, it's just that little card you get at the door at a funeral.
Yeah.
But when you actually analyze them almost anthropologically, you realize they are these incredibly high-pressure design challenges.
High pressure is the right word.
You have a canvas that is roughly 2.5 by 4.25 inches. That is incredibly tiny.
Tiny.
And in that tiny space, you have to somehow capture the essence of an entire human life.
It's like the elevator pitch of grief.
That is a perfect way to put it.
You literally have 3 seconds to make an emotional connection with the person holding it.
It is an exercise in reduction, but it has to be a reduction that expands the memory, not one that limits or flattens it.
So our mission for this deep dive is to really unpack that completely. We are going to look at why these small pieces of stationery are consistently among the most cherished keepsakes at any funeral.
They really are.
We are also going to clear up the confusion between memorial cards and prayer cards, because I will admit I definitely got that wrong before reading the source material for this.
Most people do. It is probably the most common point of confusion families have.
We are also going to dive into the surprisingly complex decisions that go into creating them. Everything from the psychology of the photo selection to the literal engineering of the paper corners.
The engineering is fascinating.
It really is. And finally, we are going to talk about the long tail of grief and why these cards matter 6 months or even 6 years after the service is over.
I think that last part is going to be incredibly resonant for people. We so often plan funerals just for the day of the event itself.
Right, the logistics of Tuesday at 2 p.m.
Exactly. We rarely plan them for the years that follow. And the memorial card is specifically designed for those years that follow.
So let's just start at the very beginning, ground level here. What exactly is a memorial card?
Okay.
I mean, beyond just being a piece of paper with a name and a date on it, the source material refers to them as remembrance pieces. How is that different from, say, the funeral program?
This is a crucial distinction to make right out of gate. Think about the other literature you interact with at a funeral.
Okay.
You walk into the church or the funeral home, and usher hands you a folded booklet. That's the program.
Right. It has the order of service, maybe a short bio, the names of the pallbearers, things like that.
Exactly. The program is fundamentally a logistical document.
An itinerary.
Yes, it is the script for the event. Its primary job is to guide you through the next 90 minutes without any confusion. It tells you, sit here, stand now, we are singing Amazing Grace, Uncle Joe is going to speak next. It functions exactly like an itinerary.
So it's a tool for the event itself.
Correct. And once that event is over, its utility drops to near zero almost instantly.
That's true. You get home and it's just sort of there.
You might keep it for a few days out of guilt, or you might eventually file it away in a lockbox with the death certificate, but it has completely finished doing its job. It guided you through the ceremony.
Done and dusted.
But the memorial card is the exact opposite. Its job begins the moment the service ends.
I really like that framing. The program is for the room, but the card is for the world outside.
Precisely. The memorial card is explicitly designed to leave the building.
Right.
It focuses much less on the logistics of the day. You won't ever find the order of service printed on a memorial card, and focuses entirely on the emotion of the life lived.
It's preserving how that person is remembered.
That's why the source material emphasizes that these pieces are meant to endure. They aren't meant to be filed away in a cabinet. They are meant to be actively integrated into the living world.
And that leads right into this concept of real estate that I found so interesting in the guide.
Oh, the physical locations.
Yes. The source talks about where these cards actually end up living. They mention wallets, tucked into Bibles, inside purses, taped to the bathroom mirror, or put in a little frame on an office desk.
Let's drill down on the wallet aspect for a second, because that is a very specific, incredibly intimate space.
It is.
It is arguably the most valuable real estate we own on our person.
It really is. I mean, if you think about what you actually keep in your wallet, it's basically your essentials-only survival kit.
Exactly. You have your ID, which is your literal identity.
Right.
Your credit cards, which are your means of survival and commerce, maybe a little bit of emergency cash, your health insurance card.
The things you absolutely cannot leave the house without.
These are the tools you need to navigate human existence. So if you take a memorial card and you purposefully slide it into one of those dedicated slots,
You are elevating that memory to the status of an essential item.
you are actively integrating that person into your daily movement through the world.
Wow.
Every single time you open your wallet to buy a cup of coffee or to show your driver's license at the bank, there is that subconscious flash of recognition.
Yeah, you just see the edge of it.
Right. And your brain says, he is still here. He is still part of my day. You simply cannot do that with a large 8.5 by 11 bifold funeral booklet.
No, it would get crushed.
It's way too bulky. It doesn't fit the space.
It's the portability that creates the intimacy.
Portability is the absolute superpower of the memorial card. It allows the memory to travel with you. It allows the deceased to come with you to the grocery store, to your office, on a family vacation.
The distribution of them is pretty versatile too, right? It's not just a matter of handing them out at the door anymore.
No, and that's a trend that is definitely changing. Traditionally, yes, you might find them placed on the chairs before the service or handed out by ushers as you sign the guest book.
Sure.
But the source explicitly mentions they are very often mailed out in the weeks afterwards.
Which I think is such a thoughtful touch, especially in our modern context where people are so spread out.
It is incredibly inclusive. Think about how scattered modern families are today.
Yeah, everyone lives in different states.
You might have a cousin living in London who just couldn't make the flight in time. Or you might have an elderly aunt who is simply too frail to travel across the country.
Right.
If you take a funeral program and mail it to them, it honestly just reminds them that they missed the main event.
That's a great point. It emphasizes their absence.
It's like sending a wish you were here postcard from a party that's already over.
That would just make you feel worse.
Exactly. But if you put a memorial card in an envelope and send it to them, you are sending them a tangible piece of the person.
You are saying you are part of this circle of grief.
Yes, you are part of this memory, even if you weren't in the room. It genuinely helps distant friends and family feel connected to the collective mourning process.
It democratizes the grief.
Beautifully put. Everyone gets to hold the exact same token, regardless of whether they were sitting in the front pew or sitting in their living room 3,000 miles away.
Okay, so we know what it is. We know where it lives, usually in the wallet. But here is where I think a lot of people, and I'm totally including myself in this, get tripped up.
The terminology.
The terms. Memorial card and prayer card. I've honestly always used them interchangeably.
Most people do.
Like, I'll go to a service and say, oh, did you get the prayer card? But our source says we need to stop doing that. because they are technically different things.
They are very different things, and honestly, mixing them up is the #1 source of friction for families when they are planning these events.
Oh, I bet.
It creates massive confusion with the stationery printers, and it creates a lot of unnecessary confusion and arguing among the family members themselves.
So break that down for us. What is the actual technical difference between the two?
Let's start with the prayer card, which is also very commonly called a holy card.
Okay.
The defining characteristic here is literally in the name. It is explicitly faith-based. That is its entire DNA.
Right.
If you look at the source material, a prayer card almost always includes, well, a prayer or a specific scripture passage or some form of traditional devotional text.
And the imagery on the front is usually highly religious too, right?
Very specific traditional iconography. You will usually see crosses, angels, specific saints, the Virgin Mary, or maybe that really classic line art sketch of the praying hands.
Oh, yeah. Everyone knows that sketch.
Right. These are incredibly common, almost mandatory in traditional Catholic and Orthodox Christian services.
So a prayer card isn't just a picture of the person. It's an active tool for faith.
Correct. The core function of a prayer card is not just to remember the person who passed, but to actually facilitate active prayer for that person.
Like praying for their soul.
Exactly. Or to provide structured spiritual comfort to the mourner through a recognizable piece of scripture. It is, at its core, a devotional object. It fits perfectly into a specific theological framework.
Okay, so that's the prayer card. Very clear. Then what exactly is the memorial card in this context?
Think of the memorial card as the broader umbrella category.
Go.
A memorial card certainly can be religious, but it absolutely doesn't have to be. It can be entirely secular. It can be spiritual without being tied to any specific dogma.
So if there isn't a traditional prayer on the back, what are we usually seeing instead?
All sorts of things. Meaningful quotes, secular poems, very often song lyrics, sometimes just a short, heartfelt personal note from the immediate family.
Okay.
The content on a memorial card focuses heavily on the actual biography of the person, rather than the eternal destination of the person.
Oh, that's a great distinction. So if my uncle was a huge classic rock fan, taking a line from a Beatles song would fit perfectly on a memorial card, but maybe it wouldn't go over so well in a traditional prayer card.
Exactly. Printing Let It Be on a holy card and handing it out at a highly traditional Requiem Mass might raise a few eyebrows.
Just a few.
But putting it on a secular memorial card, it's absolutely perfect. And the imagery on the front of the card reflects that much broader scope, too.
Right. They aren't using saints.
No. A memorial card might feature beautiful nature scenes instead. A dense forest, a mountain sunset, the ocean.
Or things they love doing.
Exactly. Hobbies are huge. You see a lot of pictures of favorite golf courses or a guy on his fishing boat or musical instruments or very often specific military service emblems for veterans.
It's really about capturing the individual's unique personality and their life passions.
Right. It captures exactly who they were on a Saturday afternoon with their friends, not just who they were on a Sunday morning in church.
But the guide from the funeral program site mentions something really interesting here. They call it the both-and approach.
Yes. The compromise.
Because I can easily imagine a family getting into a huge fight over this. You have the devout grandmother who absolutely demands the traditional prayer card, and then you have the younger secular grandkids who want the Led Zeppelin quote for their dad.
That exact conflict happens all the time in funeral planning rooms. It is a total pressure cooker.
I can't even imagine.
Emotions are running incredibly high, nobody is sleeping, and everyone is fiercely trying to protect their own specific version of the deceased's memory. The both-and approach is basically the safety valve for that pressure.
So you don't actually have to lock yourself in and choose just one style.
No, not at all. The guide explicitly suggests, why not just do both?
That seems so obvious when you say it out loud.
It does. It sometimes seems counterintuitive to families because they immediately worry about the printing cost. But honestly, when you weigh an extra $50 for printing against the cost of destroying your family's harmony during a crisis, it's incredibly cheap.
How does doing both actually work logistically on the day of the service?
Well, a lot of families will strategically distribute the traditional prayer cards just for the formal church service.
Right, leave them in the pews.
Exactly. That satisfies the religious tradition, it provides comfort to the faithful older relatives, and it respects the clergy leading the service.
Makes total sense.
But then they might also print a separate batch of secular memorial cards, and they will put those out later at the reception or the wake.
Which is usually a much more casual social environment anyway.
Exactly. And that card focuses entirely on the person's obsession with gardening or their wicked sense of humor.
That seems like a really emotionally healthy way to handle the tension. It honors the long-standing family tradition without totally erasing the unique personality quirks of the person who died.
It allows everyone in the room to mourn the specific version of the person that they actually knew. Human beings are incredibly complex.
We really are.
We are rarely ever just one thing. We are deeply faithful, and we are also funny. We are solemn, and we are silly. The both-and strategy fully acknowledges that human complexity. It stops the grieving family from feeling like they have to aggressively edit the person's entire life down to just a single flat dimension.
I really love that phrase, don't edit the life.
Yeah,
Let's shift gears just a little bit and talk about the physical design process.
yeah,
Because, as we established earlier, this is a very tiny canvas we were working with.
it is.
The art of the small canvas, I'm calling it, the source material, emphasizes that strictly because of the physical constraints, again. The standard size being around 2.5 by 4.25 inches, every single visual element on that card has to be hyper-intentional. There is absolutely no room for fluff.
It is a masterclass in minimalism. Whether you actually want it to be or not, you are forced to establish a very strict visual hierarchy.
Right.
If you are designing a movie poster, you can easily have 5 or 6 different things competing for the viewer's attention. But on a wallet card, you get 2, maybe 3 if you really push the layout.
What are those main elements?
Typically, the front of the card is dedicated entirely to what designers call the hero image. That is the primary photograph and the person's name.
Just keeping it simple.
Yes. And then the back of the card handles the data and the meaning. That means the birth and death dates and whatever the chosen message or prayer is.
Let's talk about that hero image for a minute, the photograph. Because the guide says something here that really stuck with me. They say the ultimate goal of the photo is recognition, not perfection.
That is a profoundly important piece of advice, and it's exactly where so many well-meaning families get completely stuck in the mud.
Why is that?
Because we live in this hyper-curated age of digital filters, Facetune, and flawless Instagram grids. We are deeply trained by society to always want to look absolutely perfect.
Smooth skin, perfect lighting.
Exactly. But when you are in the depths of grieving someone, you do not actually want a sanitized, aggressively airbrushed version of your loved one. You desperately want the version that actually feels like them.
So we definitely don't want to use that stiff driver's license photo where they are just staring dead-eyed into the camera lens.
Definitely not. Or even that super formal studio portrait they took at Sears 20 years ago.
Right, where they look so uncomfortable.
Exactly. Families so often make the critical mistake of digging through albums, looking for the photo with the absolute best technical lighting or the sharpest camera focus, even if the person's physical expression in the photo is totally stiff and unnatural.
But the guide says not to do that.
The source strongly suggests choosing an image that captures the person's true essence.
Even if it's flawed.
Even if it's heavily flawed. Maybe the photo was a little bit grainy because it was taken on an old iPhone at a backyard barbecue in bad lighting.
Yeah.
But if they are throwing their head back, laughing at a joke in that picture, if that's the exact loud, booming laugh you remember hearing in the kitchen, that is the photo you use, period.
Because that's the image that instantly triggers the real emotional connection for the viewer.
Right. The human brain is a pretty amazing pattern matching machine. A mourner needs to look at that small card and have their brain instantly fire off the thought, yes, that is absolutely him. If the chosen photo is way too formal or heavily retouched, it subconsciously creates an emotional distance.
Like an uncanny valley effect.
Exactly, the uncanny valley effect. It technically looks like them based on the geometry of their face, but you look at it and you realize the actual soul of the person is totally missing from the image.
Now, speaking of retouching, the guide does actually touch on modern editing technology. We do have the power to fix bad photos now.
We do. And there is definitely a proper time and place for using it if you find the absolutely perfect emotional photo, but there is a massive ketchup stain right on the middle of their shirt.
Or like a random stranger photobombing them in the background.
Right. By all means, use modern digital tools to clean those specific distractions up. Fix the glowing red eye, brighten up the dark exposure so you can see their face better.
But there's a limit.
But, and this is a really big warning the experts give, do not ever airbrush the actual character out of the person's face.
Meaning, don't smooth out the laugh lines.
Exactly. Leave the wrinkles alone. Those laugh lines are the literal map of their life. Those deep wrinkles are the physical evidence of all the decades of smiles they shared with you.
That's a really beautiful way to think about it.
If you digitally remove them to make them look 10 years younger, you are actively erasing their history. You are presenting the attendees with a plastic mannequin, not a real memory.
What about the text on the card? I have to imagine typography becomes a total nightmare on a card this physically small.
Oh, it really can be.
I have definitely been to services and seen cards where someone chose a dark, moody forest background and then put really thin, black, curly script text right on top of the trees.
And you can't read a single word of it.
You literally need night vision goggles to decipher the prayer.
Yeah, that is what I call the camo text problem.
Camo text, exactly.
Yes, legibility is absolutely king here. It has to be the top priority. You constantly have to remember your primary user base when designing these.
Who are we designing for?
Think about who typically attends a funeral. Very often, it is a significantly older demographic.
Right.
You have older relatives, maybe with cataracts or failing eyesight, and they are trying to read this tiny card in the middle of a dimly lit funeral home parlor.
That's a really good point. Funeral homes are generally designed for soft, comforting mood lighting, not for reading fine print in a book.
Exactly. So the guide strongly advises using those highly decorative fonts, those big, sweeping, swirly calligraphy scripts, incredibly sparingly.
Like maybe just use it for the person's first and last name at the top.
Right. Use it as a design accent. But the actual body text, the long poem on the back or the birth and death dates, that text needs to be exceptionally clean, simple, and standard.
What kind of fonts are we talking about?
You want to use a strong sans serif or a very clear traditional serif font. Think of your standards like Arial, Helvetica, or Garamond.
Some people might think that's boring.
People do think it's boring, but it isn't boring. It is respectful. It deeply respects the grieving reader's need to actually be able to understand the words without getting a headache.
And the chosen background image needs to behave itself too.
Behave itself. I really like that phrasing. Yes, it does. The background image is supposed to be the stage, not the lead actor.
Right.
If you have a really busy, colorful floral pattern as your background, you absolutely need to use a text box overlay.
What does that mean for people who don't know graphic design?
It means you put a semi-transparent white box behind your black text to create a buffer. It creates necessary visual contrast. You simply can't just slap black text directly over a high-contrast picture of a tree branch.
Because it just all blends together.
Right, it creates intense visual noise. And visual noise creates subconscious stress in the brain, which is the absolute last thing you want to induce in people at a funeral service.
There's also this interesting note in the source material about cohesion. Basically, making sure you are matching the design of the memorial card to the rest of the funeral stationery.
This is a really big point of emphasis for the funeral program site. They talk a lot about the importance of creating a unified tribute.
How so?
Well, imagine if your main funeral program has a bright, rustic, floral theme with yellow sunflowers everywhere, and the thank you cards you plan to mail out later are also matching sunflowers.
Okay.
But then the memorial card you hand people features a moody, dark blue beach scene. It might feel completely disjointed to the attendee.
Right. It creates this weird subconscious dissonance.
It really does. It inadvertently feels like the family just grabbed whatever design template happened to be on sale at the printer that day.
Like they didn't really care.
Exactly. But when the entire visual environment of the funeral is strictly consistent, when there is essentially a cohesive brand identity for the service, it feels totally different.
It feels intentional.
It feels highly intentional. It silently signals to all the attendees that this person's final farewell was handled with immense care and forethought.
Okay, now I want to get into the actual nitty-gritty of physically making these things, because the source material clearly outlines two totally distinct paths a family can take. The DIY route and the done-for-you professional route.
Yes.
And honestly, reading through this, I feel like choosing between these two paths is almost a personality test for the grieving family.
It absolutely is a personality test, but it also depends incredibly heavily on the specific circumstances of the death and the current resources of the family.
Meaning budget.
Partially money, yes,
Yeah.
but by resources, I also really mean their raw emotional bandwidth during that chaotic week.
Okay, let's walk down path A first. The DIY approach. Who is this primarily for?
Obviously, at a basic level, it's for the highly budget-conscious family. Funerals are very expensive. But psychologically speaking, it is specifically for the doer.
You mean the person in the family who just desperately needs to stay busy?
Yes, exactly. Acute grief is often intensely paralyzing. It makes you feel completely
Right,
helpless.
because you can't fix it.
You've entirely lost control of the biggest thing in the room, the reality of life and death.
Yeah.
So, actively taking control of the very small things, like obsessing over the exact font size on a memorial card or adjusting the crop of a photograph, can actually be incredibly therapeutic for some people.
It gives them a sense of agency.
It gives them back their agency. The literal process of sitting at the computer and making the card actually becomes an active part of their mourning process.
They're sitting there quietly looking at photos.
Right. They are reading through different poems. They are making tiny creative choices.
Yeah.
They are actively, physically remembering the person.
That makes a lot of sense. It's almost like an act of service, a way of saying, I am doing this labor for you.
It is a profound act of service. However, the source material explicitly warns, and I think this is probably a critical warning for anyone listening, choosing the DIY path comes with a massive risk factor.
What's the risk?
I call it the grief fog.
Oh, the
The
typos.
typos, the devastating typos, printing the completely wrong birth year, grossly misspelling a grandmother's middle name.
Oh, no.
When you are deeply grieving, your brain is literally in a dense fog. You are scientifically not operating at your sharpest cognitive level.
You're just totally exhausted.
You are operating through a thick haze of shock, trauma, and sadness. And because the physical canvas of the memorial card is so small, a single spelling error glares at you like a neon sign. There is simply nowhere on a 2-inch card for a typo to hide.
I can honestly only imagine the absolute horror of paying to print 200 cards, carefully laminating all of them, and then suddenly realizing right before the service that you put the wrong date of death.
It happens. I have seen it happen, and it is completely devastating to the person who designed it.
So how do you prevent that if you are DIYing?
The advice from the guide here is absolutely imperative. You must implement the two-person rule.
Okay.
If you decide to DIY the cards, you must have a second person aggressively proofread the final file before you hit print. Preferably someone who is slightly removed from the immediate inner circle of grief. A close family friend, maybe. Have them read the card backwards, word by word. Have them physically check the birth dates against a legal document. Do not, under any circumstances, trust your own tired eyes.
That is fantastic advice. Okay, so that's the DIY path. Potentially high reward emotionally, but also a very high risk for errors. What about path B, the professional service?
This path is heavily for the family that is just entirely overwhelmed.
Just drowning in tasks.
Right. If you are drowning in the sheer logistics of a sudden death, you are dealing with the county coroner, you are negotiating with the cemetery director, you're trying to hire a caterer, you are tracking relatives flying in from out of state. Sometimes you just absolutely need to hand a task off to a professional and walk away.
The done-for-you option.
Right. The family simply provides the chosen photo and the basic text information, and a professional graphic designer handles all the annoying formatting, the text alignment, and the complicated image resolution issues.
They know what they're doing.
They do. They know all about the technical printing stuff, like bleed lines.
Actually, can you explain that term real quick for the listeners? What is a bleed line?
Sure. So in commercial printing, if you want the background color of a design to go all the way to the absolute physical edge of the card without leaving a cheap-looking white border around it, you actually have to print the background image slightly larger than the final cut size of the card.
Okay, I follow.
Then the printer physically cuts the excess paper off. That tiny extra zone of printed color that gets sliced away is called the bleed.
Oh, I see.
If a DIYer doesn't properly account for the bleed in their file, and the commercial paper cutter shifts even 1 millimeter during the cutting process, you end up with this really ugly, uneven white stripe running down the edge of all your cards.
Ah, the ultimate mark of an amateur print job.
Exactly. A professional service handles all the bleed margins. They do the necessary photo color correction. They select the premium paper stocks. They ensure that when you finally open that cardboard box from the printer on the morning of the funeral, you aren't going to burst into tears of disappointment.
Right, it basically buys you peace of mind.
And when you are actively grieving, peace of mind is easily the most expensive, valuable commodity in the world.
And it is worth noting that the funeral program site, as our main source points out, actually supports both of these approaches.
They do.
They sell highly customizable templates for the DIYers who want that control, but they also offer full, done-for-you design and printing services for the people who just need the help.
It's really all about recognizing that Every single family's emotional bandwidth is wildly different during that horrible first week. You have to meet people exactly where they are.
I completely agree. You know, I want to move on to something that I think is very often overlooked by families, but the guide really goes out of its way to highlight it.
Yeah.
The actual tactile experience, the literal printing and the physical logistics of the object. Because, as we've been saying, we're not just looking at these cards on a glowing screen, we are physically holding them in our hands.
This is where the sheer objectness of the card really begins to matter. We are officially moving away from aesthetic design and getting into structural engineering.
Right.
The source material specifically spends time discussing paper choice. Like, why use heavy cardstock at all? Why not just print them on regular standard printer paper from your home office to save money?
Well, I assume mostly because regular thin copy paper would just instantly crumple and disintegrate in a wallet after about 5 seconds.
Durability is definitely the primary practical reason, yes, you want it to last. But there is also a very deep psychological reason behind paperweight.
How so?
As humans, we subconsciously associate physical weight with emotional value.
It's interesting.
If someone hands you a flimsy, paper-thin piece of material, your brain instantly registers it as totally disposable. It feels exactly like a cheap promotional flyer somebody hands you on a street corner.
Or like a cheap takeout menu, you just crumple it up and toss it in the recycling bin without thinking.
Exactly. But if an usher hands you a thick piece of heavy, stiff cardstock, something that actually has noticeable heft and resistance when you bend it, your brain instantly registers it as a keepsake.
It demands a different kind of respect.
It absolutely does. It feels substantial. And that physical substance implies that the actual content of the card, the precious memory of the deceased person, is also substantial and worthy of deep respect.
That's fascinating. It's
Yeah.
entirely subconscious, but
Yeah.
it makes perfect sense when you think about it.
And then beyond the weight, you have to choose the surface finishes, specifically choosing between a matte finish versus a high gloss finish.
Is there actually a right or wrong answer there?
Not necessarily a universal right answer, no.
Yeah.
But they do serve very different functions. A high gloss finish basically mimics a traditional old school photograph. It makes the colors of the hero image really pop off the page. It creates very deep, rich blacks. It feels just like holding a glossy 4x6 picture.
So if the photo is the most important part, you go gloss.
Right. But a matte finish is much softer. It is completely non-glare, it feels very elegant and contemporary, and most importantly, it is significantly easier to read under harsh lights.
Why is that?
Because it doesn't reflect the overhead lighting back into your eyes. So if your family chose to print a very long, complex poem with small text on the back of the card, matte is usually the far better functional choice, because the older attendees aren't constantly fighting the reflection of the funeral home chandeliers just to read the words.
It makes a lot of sense. And then there's this specific detail in the guide about rounded corners.
Oh, the
I honestly read that and thought it was purely an aesthetic choice. Like, oh, look, rounded corners. This looks like a sleek, modern smartphone app icon.
I think a lot of people assume it's just a modern design trend, but it's actually deeply practical engineering for a wallet-sized item.
Engineering for a wallet.
Yes. I call it the aerodynamics of the wallet.
Explain that. That's a great term.
Think about a sharp, standard 90-degree corner on a rigid piece of paper. That sharp point is a severe structural weak point.
Right.
When you try to repeatedly slide that square card in and out of a tight leather wallet slot, that sharp corner catches on the leather seam every single time. It bends backwards. It quickly gets dog-eared.
And then the layers of the cardstock start to peel apart and look terrible.
Exactly. It degrades rapidly. But rounded corners are, in a very real sense, aerodynamic.
They just glide right in.
They smoothly slide in and out of tight wallet pockets without ever catching or snagging. It effectively prevents the card from looking totally tattered and destroyed after only a month of carrying it.
Wow.
It actively ensures the physical longevity of the keepsake. So again, it looks like a purely aesthetic design choice, but it actively serves the ultimate function of long-term endurance.
Speaking of all these logistics, there's always the stressful question of quantity. How many of these cards do you actually print?
That is always the hardest guess.
The rule of thumb in the guide seems to be basically everyone you expect to come plus a whole bunch of extras.
Always overprint extras. The specific mathematical formula I always like to advise families to use is your expected head count plus a dedicated family reserve, plus the expected mail-out list, plus a flat 10% buffer on top of everything.
Why do you need a dedicated family reserve?
Because the immediate inner circle family members almost always want multiple copies for themselves.
Oh, they don't just take one.
Rarely just one. A grieving daughter might easily want 5 copies of her father's card. She wants one for her wallet, one to mark her place in her Bible, one to tape to her bedside table lamp, and maybe 2 pristine copies just to safely store in a fireproof keepsake box in the closet.
That makes total sense.
And honestly, you never, ever want to experience the feeling of running out of cards at the actual service. Turning away an attendee who asks for a remembrance card is a truly terrible, gut-sinking feeling for the host family.
And as we mentioned earlier in the deep dive, even if you vastly overprint, they really aren't ever wasted. You can just easily slip the leftovers into the envelopes when you finally sit down to mail out the formal thank you cards a month later.
Precisely. They have a functional shelf life that extends far, far beyond the actual day of the funeral.
Which perfectly brings us to the final, and I honestly think the most poignant segment of our deep dive today.
The long tail.
The long tail of grief. We have spent a lot of time talking about the memorial card purely as a designed object, but let's talk about it as an emotional companion.
Companion is a really beautiful word for what this object becomes. The source material specifically describes the days immediately following a funeral service as profoundly disorienting.
Disorienting is such a perfect, accurate description of that feeling.
It really is.
Because the adrenaline of the funeral planning finally wears off. The out-of-town guests all pack up and go home. The neighbors stop dropping off those sympathy casserole dishes.
And you are just left standing there.
And the absolute silence of the empty house sets in. The phone completely stops ringing.
In that specific moment, acute grief is just a massive void. It is an emotional vacuum. And having a small, tangible reminder, something you can literally, physically pick up with your hands, firmly anchors you to reality.
It gives you something to hold on to.
Exactly. It is a vital way to externalize the heavy memory of the person when your internal mental world feels entirely chaotic and unmanageable. It physically connects you to the harsh reality of the loss, yes, but it also reconnects you to the enduring reality of the love you felt.
And then beyond that immediate aftermath, there's the much longer-term impact. The source guide talks about the phenomenon of the card unexpectedly resurfacing months or even years later.
Yes.
The ambush of memory.
That ambush happens to absolutely everyone who has ever kept one of these cards.
Oh, for sure.
You are 6 months, maybe a year out from the death. You are generally feeling okay. You are moving on with your life. You go to the closet to put on your heavy winter coat for the very first time that cold season.
You reach your hand down into the deep pocket.
And your fingers brush against a piece of stiff cardstock. You pull it out, and there is the card.
It just completely stops you right in your tracks. It's a total gut punch.
It is a gut punch, but usually it is not in a severely traumatic or negative way. It provides a very sudden, very quiet, deeply private moment of connection.
Right.
It almost feels like a sudden, small visit from that lost person. The source guide states that these cards offer words, images, and sentiments that families and friends can return to again and again over the years. It acts as a persistent, patient, physical presence in your life.
And I think this brings us right back to the giant elephant in the room that we started this whole conversation with.
The digital world.
The digital world. We have endless online memorial walls now. We have permanent Facebook tribute pages that stay up forever. We have interactive digital guest books where you can upload videos.
We have so much digital architecture for grief.
We do. So the honest question is, do we really, truly still need to be printing these small, physical pieces of paper?
The core argument from the source material, and I wholeheartedly agree with it as an expert in this field, is that the modern digital world does not ever replace the analog world of grief.
It just complements it.
It complements it beautifully, but it fundamentally cannot replace it.
Why do you think that is? What is the missing element?
Digital space is theoretically infinite, which is great, but it is also inherently distant and cold.
Right.
You are always forced to look at a digital tribute through a pane of glass on a screen. You can't reach out and physically touch a Facebook memorial page. You can't smell it. You can't fold it up and slip it into your front shirt pocket right over your heart.
No, you can't.
The guide argues that there is a deeply ingrained biological human need for physical remembrance. We are flesh and blood beings. We rely heavily on our tactile senses to process massive emotional events like death.
It's basically the emotional difference between looking at a photograph of two people hugging and actually being the one receiving the hug.
That is very close. Or Maybe it's the difference between quickly reading an email from your grandmother versus slowly unfolding a handwritten ink on paper letter from her.
Oh, that's a perfect comparison.
The literal informational content of the words might be exactly the same in both mediums, but the physical experience of the medium itself entirely changes the emotional resonance for the reader.
The medium is the message, as they say.
Exactly. A phone screen is cold. It actively emits artificial light into your eyes. Paper, on the other hand, passively reflects the natural light of the room. It physically warms up to the temperature of your hand when you hold it.
Wow, I never thought about it like that.
And crucially, paper accumulates actual history over time. You can aggressively crumple a memorial card in a moment of anger. You can smooth it back out on the kitchen table. You can accidentally stain it with a drop of coffee or a tear.
It ages with you.
It physically ages right alongside your grief. A JPEG file sitting on a tech company's server does not ever accumulate personal history. It remains totally static forever.
So the card literally bears physical witness to the passage of your grief in a way that a digital computer file simply cannot.
It does.
It really does seem like the tiny memorial card is essentially a bridge. It's a bridge between the living and the dead, obviously, but it's also a necessary bridge between the chaotic, constantly buzzing digital world we live in and the quiet, analog space of deep human memory.
It is a very small, unassuming object that manages to say a very, very big thing. It says, this specific human life mattered immensely, and it is actively being remembered today. And it quietly gives the living a durable tool to keep that memory active in their daily routine.
So as we start to wrap up this deep dive, let's quickly recap the ground we've covered. We've gone from initially defining the card distinctly, not as a logistical program, but as a permanent keepsake, to fully understanding the crucial theological and practical differences between the traditional religious prayer card and the more secular biographical memorial card.
Right. And we've looked closely at the intense design challenges of working with that incredibly small canvas. We discussed the absolute necessity for choosing the right emotionally resonant photo, selecting a highly legible font, and utilizing the correct paperweight.
We talked about the uncanny valley of bad digital editing.
Yes. And the surprising structural aerodynamics of rounded corners for wallets.
Like, it debated the intense psychological benefits and the high risks of the DIY route versus simply handing the stress over to a professional done-for-you service. And finally, we've seen how this tiny 2-inch rectangle of thick paper serves as a durable, patient companion through the incredibly long, winding road of grief.
It truly is a testament to the powerful fact that even in an increasingly entirely digital age, we humans still desperately need physical things we can hold in our hands.
Which leads me to a final, slightly provocative thought I really want to leave you with today.
Okay.
We spend so much of our daily time carefully curating our digital lives. We meticulously manage our Instagram grids. We update our LinkedIn professional profiles.
Constantly.
We have those 14,000 random photos sitting on our smartphones, buried deep in a cloud server that we don't control. But if the global power grid went out tomorrow,
Oh, wow.
what is actually left inside the physical drawer in your house?
That is a genuinely haunting question to ask yourself.
Perhaps the ultimate lesson of the humble memorial card isn't really just about how we choose to bury the dead.
No.
Maybe it's actually a vital lesson for the living. Maybe we should actively be thinking a lot more about curating tangible physical memories right now while we are still here.
Printing the good photos out.
Exactly. Printing the photos, writing the physical ink on paper notes, actively creating the durable artifacts that our loved ones can physically hold on to when we're inevitably not there to hold them anymore.
Because in the end, no matter how advanced technology gets, you simply can't put a cloud server in your leather wallet.
Exactly. You cannot put a cloud server in your wallet. Something for all of us to really think about this week. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into this surprisingly profound, incredibly complex world of memorial cards.
It has been a real privilege to unpack this with you.
We will see you all next time. Take care of each other.